Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you to another live stream of Let Us Reason. And thank you, of course, for your patience. We decided to postpone the start by 30 minutes. And I'm thankful, of course, for all of you who waited for that. I am so excited to have today with me a dear brother from Australia, Daniel Secomb. And Daniel and I have connected a few years back, and I'll let him reminisce a little bit on that. But recently, I met Daniel in person in Texas at a conference that deals with end times and Islam and other topics. And then he kindly agreed to even teach one of the sessions for our online conference that just concluded about a couple of weeks ago. And his topic was really interesting. And the title of today's show kind of like reflect back on the issues that he addressed. With that in mind, I want to, as always, thank all of you who are joining us here, and I want to thank also our moderators for their wonderful, basically, commitment to the show. Brother, thank you for making time for us. Thank you for your flexibility, and I am honored to have you here. Why don't you give our viewers just a quick background about yourself and your ministry?
Okay, so my name's Daniel Secomb. I'm from Australia. I live probably about an hour and a half drive north of Sydney. So I live in a place called the Central Coast. About 8 years ago, I would say, probably maybe 7 years ago, the Lord laid it upon my heart to start a ministry. Well, it just started as a website, like an aggregated news website called Israel, Islam, and End Times, just to help people get a bit of a handle on with what's happening in regard to Israel and the Jewish people and Islam and the Muslim world and all the geopolitics of the Middle East and how all that correlates with eschatology. That's the biblical study of the end times. So that went. I started that back in 2013, and it just started gaining traction and became more and more, gained more and more in popularity. Then I started another website called Culture War Resource, and that's more to do with what we're seeing happening now in the culture wars with the rise of the left and the threats to freedom, freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and just all those topics to do with Marxism and cultural Marxism and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so I've got these two things that are separate from each other, yet they kind of interrelate with each other. As you were probably already aware, Islam, it factors into the culture war. That has actually been a very interesting mix, let me to say the least. But since then, I've started doing seminars, my own seminars in 2015 and 16. And then the Lord just opened the door for me to go worldwide. And I started speaking in conferences in the US and other places. So, the Lord's been good.
Wonderful, my brother. Thank you so much for this background. It's interesting when you said, Islam basically capitalizes on cultural issues. Can you elaborate a little bit further on what you mean by that?
It does. In fact, it is interesting because both the left and Islam had to have a change of tactic in the way that they were going to bring down the West. Both had the goal to destroy the West. Marx believed that it was going to be inevitable. It was going to be inevitable in which the West would fall under communism. He believed that the proletariat states under the dictatorship of the proletariat, in other words, communist states would eventually prevail over the bourgeoisie capitalist states, in other words, the West, in other words, America, etc., etc. He believed that communism would prevail, but he believed it would inevitably happen through some kind of like a military confrontation. However, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union, that failed to materialize. And so what happened is that the Marxists shifted gears, and they then began to throw all their weight behind another communist philosopher whose name was Antonio Gramsci. He was an Italian communist back in the 1920s. He differed with Marx because he believed that Marx was wrong about warring between classes. He says, no, don't make it a war between the poor workers and the business owners. You make it a war between culture within cultural groups. And that really was a masterstroke of pure genius. In fact, Gramsci is known for the phrase, the long march through the institutions. The long march through the institutions. In other words, Gramsci's vision was to slowly infiltrate the cultural institutions of the West, to slowly infiltrate them and to influence them for the purpose of advancing socialism, of advancing with the final goal in being communism. Now, yes.
What do you mean by cultural institutions, Daniel?
Okay, so cultural institutions in regard to, well, think of the three biggest megaphones that the left dominate today. So first of all, academia, right? So all the cultural institutions through academia. And then you have Hollywood. That's a big cultural institution that they've infiltrated. They've infiltrated, dominated Hollywood now, control Hollywood. You would never find, in fact, conservative celebrities are a very, very, very rare breed in Hollywood today. They're very, very rare. And third and finally, the media. And I guess you could also include social media in that. So these are the cultural institutions in which the left have now dominated. And again, this didn't happen overnight. This happened over a long period of time.
Yeah. It's interesting, these three cultural institutions you just mentioned, it's what America is living right now, basically as being attacked from these three directions. You have the new generation who's been fed at these academic institutions to even, it's kind of baffling to me, to hate their own culture, their own backgrounds, their own country. And then you have the media who is telling you right now how you ought to think. They're even going as far as telling you who is your president, whether you like it or not. You have to take it that way. They're telling you who you should accept, whether regardless of whether the Constitution have its own process or not. And then the third one that you mentioned also, it's absolutely amazing to me how Hollywood is brainwashing people with you watch new shows now, and there is all kind of cultural issues that are just embedded in there, and it's not up to you to reject it or not. In fact, if you even voice out your opposition, you're an outcast already. You're just backward mentality. But I'm sorry, I couldn't help but to interrupt you to share about these things.
Look, that's a great point, great observations, and you're right. I mean, you see, Hollywood. Well, in every culture, in every civilization, we have always had the storytellers. The storytellers. These are the people that are within the entertainment industry. Now, the politicians had a vestige interest in controlling the storytellers, in controlling the entertainment industry. Now, Marcus Attilus Cicero said, and this is when him commenting on Rome, on the Roman culture. He said the evil was not inbred in circuses per se, but in the willingness of the people to sell their rights as free men for full bellies and the excitement of the games, which would serve to distract them from the other human hungers which bread and circuses can never appease. Isn't that interesting? I mean, when you look at Hollywood, Hollywood is the bread and circuses that is distracting us from the things that really, really matter, in particularly our freedom.
Yeah, and if you think about it, by the way, Daniel, they have these three institutions, cultural institutions that you mentioned. They have to work in tangent with each other.
Yeah.
Basically, the school prepares you, Hollywood will use you, and the social media is your sounding voice. Yeah. So you see how they work and collaborate together. And that's one thing, by the way, I give to the liberals. They unite at any cost.
Yep. They do. They unite at any cost. And the other thing too is that why are we witnessing such a breathtaking polarization within our culture? I mean, I know I talk to many Americans, and many of them, especially the older Americans, are absolutely shocked to see that how divided their country is right now, and they just can't really put their finger on it and think, well, what happened? But I think it's not. There's no single answer, but I believe that there is a bunch of different reasons that all come together to make up the perfect storm in regard to the division that we're seeing. I believe one of the major contributors to that is social media. That being, when somebody joins social media, they basically add friends, and I'm reminiscing from the time 10 years ago when I first joined it, and then social media becomes a place where you begin to share ideas, and then it's just inevitable that those ideas become more and more political, right? Especially if God is not part of the equation. So people have this inert desire where they want to be able to make a difference, that they want to be able to be a part of a movement which can bring utopia upon the world. They want to be a part of a movement in which they can bring about utopia. So this is why there has this been gravitational. Social media has basically turned into a political domain. A political domain. And what's happened?
A powerful political domain, Daniel.
Yes.
A powerful, very powerful political domain. And they can demonize you immediately if you dare to stand against them.
If you dare to stand against them. And what has happened is that when people like something, right, for example, if people like an organization, or they click on like to like a rock band or whatever, they are subscribing to whatever these people put up, right? So their worldview continually comes up upon their feed, and that kind of acts like a process in which it forms people's worldviews into two different streams, right? If you're conservative and you have a conservative worldview, and if you're leftist and you have like a secular humanist worldview. So that's kind of what has caused this diversion in these two different streams of thought. Now, these people, when they get up in the morning, they go on their phones, and they are subject to the constant barrage of propaganda that comes up on their phone. This is called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias. So they are basically subjected to a constant stream of confirmation bias. And the moment someone says something that goes against what they believe a little bit, they just shut them off. They unfriend them. And that means that they're constantly hearing this narrative, and they've completely shut off any other option, any other differing worldview. And this is why we are now in a place where people cannot even fathom that there are other ideas out there. In fact, I think it was Buckley. I think it was Buckley who said that liberals believe in the idea of people having other opinions, but are shocked to discover that people actually do have other opinions.
It is really interesting. I mean, I'm gonna just give an example of what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you and I are not here to share political views. I'm not here to talk about Trump, but I'm going to use that example.
Yeah.
President Trump, a couple of times in the last week, mentioned something about voters fraud. Twitter tagged his tweets and put a label and says basically that these are false information. And one time he declared himself to be the winner, and they said other news basically outlets declared the results differently. Now think about this. Here is a contrast between a constitutional process, legal process, and opinion.
Yeah.
And opinion these days is taken over. And I can tell you the US is going down the tube if this continues. To be honest with you, I've never seen how quickly this deterioration in this nation. I mean, I can suspect it for years now. I've been talking about it, but I have never, ever thought I will see it in my lifetime, and seeing it deteriorate so fast, so quickly like this. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more also, if you feel comfortable, on Australia, New Zealand, if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, look, let me read to you. I want to read to you a sobering quote from Nikita Khrushchev, and he said this actually in 1959. He said this. He said, "Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible. No, you won't accept communism outright, but we'll keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you finally wake up and find out that you already have communism. We won't,"
Absolutely.
he says, "we won't have to fight you. We'll so weaken your economy until you fall like overripe fruit into our hands."
Frightening, but it's
Yeah.
happening already.
Yes, it
It
is.
is happening, Daniel. And mark my
Yeah.
word, brother, if this trend continues, the US is done. It's put it in
Yes.
a basket and you can stick a fork in it.
Yes.
And that's the direction that is taking place right now, sadly, of course,
It
unless
is.
unless the church rises to the occasion. So that's what we want to address pretty soon here after you finish your thoughts.
Well, that's right. I mean, listen, from an end times perspective, from a eschatological perspective, what we're seeing now is just breathtaking when you read Matthew 24, when you read Luke 21, when you read Mark 13. Everything that Jesus talked about in regard to the last days, we are seeing playing out before our very eyes. Jesus said that there will be a great falling away. And there's been a spectacular falling away happening within America. But even from a generational perspective, when you look at the West as a whole, the falling away happened in Europe first. Okay, so Europe has experienced this gradual apostasy over the past 200 or 300 years, but now, and thank God for your founding fathers, because the founding fathers came up with the Constitution to be impervious to all that with what was going on in Europe. They came up with a constitution that would stand the test of time. But now it's becoming, I mean, America is now at the point now where people are walking away from the Lord, left, right, and center. And what is interesting, Al, is this, is that Pew Research last year came out with research, and they discovered that when people walk away from the faith, okay, so atheists are 700% more likely to embrace leftist ideology, liberal ideology. 700% more likely to favor big government policies such as the Democrats. And I mean, when you think about that, I mean, it's just incredible when people shift worldviews, when they go from believing in a God in which objective moral values are anchored in Him. So we believe that right and wrong and good and evil are still good and evil, independent of human opinion. Irrespective of what opinions people have, evil will always be evil and good will always be good. And yet once people move away from that and they adopt this humanist worldview, this godless worldview in which God does not exist, what happens is that, well, it's almost as if they become like their own God. They get to,
Exactly. And
yeah,
that's where you see relativism. That's where you see humanism. That's where you see liberalism. That's where you see
yeah,
new age. You call it anything you want, it's still the same. And
yeah,
that's when everyone wants to do what is good in their own eye. And
yes.
you cannot really fault them for it, because then you're going to be what? A racist if you stand against me.
Exactly. Newhouse said that socialism is the religion people get when they lose their religion. He said socialism is the religion people get when they lose their religion. And part of the
Amen.
reason for that, sorry, Al, you're going to say something?
Oh, no, no. In a little bit, I'm going to read just a definition about liberalism, and I just want people to hear and just compare to what's going on right now as we speak in the US. The definition is just mind-boggling, but I'll get to it when you're done.
Yeah, well, listen, leftists are utopians. They are utopians. And it's like they have gone back. It really is it's like the Tower of Babel that we are witnessing before our very eyes. It's the same movement, right? So these people reject God's mandate because God's mandate was, I want you to spread out across the earth and populate the earth, fill the earth. God was also the one who instituted nations. We know that from Acts chapter 17. God was the one who instituted nations. But they rejected all that, and they said, no, let's become one people, and let's take on one project. Let's build a tower that can reach the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. This is exactly what they're saying.
The Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel. Exactly what's going on.
Exactly. Now listen to this quote by Dostoevsky. He says, socialism is the Tower of Babel built without God, not to mount heaven from earth, but to set up heaven on earth. And this is why, Al, this is why leftists are so passionate about politics. They eat, sleep, and breathe politics. Like from the moment they wake up in the morning, politics, 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 to the moment they go to bed, it's all politics. It's their religion. It's their religion. That's essentially what it has become. This is why we are witnessing this woke phenomenon. You know, the woke experience is like their born again experience. That's what happens. It's like when a leftist when they become woke, it's like they become born again. And then they have this process of repentance where they repent from anything to do with white supremacy. They repent from anything to do with whiteness or anything to do with racism. What is it that they talk about? They talk about the racism that you can't see, but it's in you. You know, they repent from all these so-called leftist sins. These are all collective sins, by the way.
Yeah. Just watch, brother. There is an apology tour coming soon.
Exactly, but but this is all very dangerous. This is all very dangerous. And look, what is their mantra? Well, their mantra is all about social justice, and social justice is not justice at all. You know, within the Bible, justice doesn't have an adjective. Okay, there's justice and there's injustice. There's no social justice. But social justice is socialism's method of justice in which they will basically deal with the crimes and the injustices of capitalism and Christianity. That's essentially what they're both at war with. Capitalism, Christianity. In fact, Karl Marx himself said this. He said, my object in life is to dethrone God and to destroy capitalism. He said, my object in life is to dethrone God and to destroy capitalism. So social justice is not justice at all. If anything, it is revenge. It is the revenge of these oppressed people, so-called oppressed people, by the way, because the leftists rub their sore red and get them as agitated and as aggrieved as they possibly can. And because this is the whole game plan, right? Look what these white people did this to you, and if you vote for us, we'll take it to them. Like we will deal with them. That's why you have to vote for us, right? That's how it works. And look, where social justice leads to is absolutely frightening. Look what's happening in South Africa with all the murders of the white farmers. That is the end game of social justice, because that's when the oppressed finally get up and they turn the tables and then they deal out so-called justice against their former oppressors.
Exactly. And that's what I'm feeling is like at some point in America, the white people will begin to feel the minority, even if they're not a minority. They begin to feel that they're the minority now and that they have no voice whatsoever. And to be honest with you, what was their crime? I mean, I understand we're talking about ancestry. So what? You know, you can't punish people today for what people did 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago. You know, exactly. It's kind of funny how they don't like us to talk about what Muhammad did 1400 years ago, because they say, oh, that was 1400 years ago. I mean, why would you want to punish people or even try to? But his teaching continues till today.
It does.
Yet, you know, whatever the founding fathers did 400 years ago or 300 years ago, it doesn't continue. People are waking up realizing, okay, well, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it doesn't work that way. Now, I just want to make a comment real quickly, and then I'm going to read a definition, and then I'm turn it back over to you, brother. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here with us today. Today's show is interesting. It talks about basically liberalism and its connection with Islam and the church, and end times also, if time permits us. I couldn't think of anyone better than my dear brother here. And guess what, folks? This is going to be just one of many shows that he and I will be doing on this topic, because you can see how important it is. Now, Dr. Strange, you said you wanted to ask me a question, and I look and I see a strange question by you. So no pun intended here. You're asking me about the pericope of the adulterous woman in John. Did you read the title? Are we talking about the adulterous woman in John here? Maybe you came to the wrong show, by the way, because we did a show on this. So go and please watch that show with Dr. James Snap Jr. Better yet, go to his website. Now, Dr. Strange, I'm going to ask you to ask a real question related to this topic. The next question, if it is not related to this, guess what? I have a strange finger that blocks people. So I just don't want you to really get the wrath of that finger. Okay, brother, keep going.
You know, just talking about the whole thing with reparations, which is just the most absurd concept that you could ever possibly think of, you know, and you nailed it, Al, with what you mentioned. Like, how is it that our ancestors are guilty of things that they've done centuries ago, and we should be accountable for that? Actually, Thomas Sowell, who's one of my favorite philosophers, he said something very similar. He said, have we reached the ultimate stage of absurdity, where some people are held responsible for things that happened before they were born, while other people are not held responsible for what they themselves are doing today? And I think, oh yeah. And look, that is also one of the great allures of leftism, because when you become a leftist, you're not responsible for why your life is so bad, you know. And this is why many leftists they're so depressed, and yet they blame the reason why they're so depressed on the collective boogeyman. It's on the collective boogeyman. They never take responsibility for their own life, because that's a right-wing thing, right? That's a conservative thing. Because we believe in personal responsibility. Whereas the left don't know. No, it's not their fault why they don't have a job. It's not their fault why they're so depressed. It's not their fault why they don't have a girlfriend. It's not their fault. You know, it builds up this rage within them, where they rage at all the collective bad guys. And again, this just proves why this doctrine is so dangerous. Why it's extremely dangerous.
Let me read a definition that I found about liberalism, and it's hilarious, brother. It is absolutely hilarious. When you hear it, start thinking about Portland, Seattle, you know, riots. You know, just see what's going on here. Here's what it says. This is Britannica, by the way. The site says liberalism is a political doctrine that takes protecting and enhancing the freedom of the individual to be the central problem of politics. Yeah. Liberals typically believe that government is necessary to protect individuals from being harmed by others, but they also recognize that government itself can pose a threat to liberty. Mm-hmm. As the revolutionary American pamphleteer Thomas Paine expressed it in Common Sense in 1776, where he says, government is at best a necessary evil. Law, judges, and police are needed to secure the individual's life and liberty, but their coercive power may also be turned against him. The problem then is to devise a system that gives government the power necessary to protect individual liberty, but also prevents those who govern from abusing that power. Translation: defunding police.
You hit the nail on the head. And really, the left and right basically have this outlook, and it's like this: do people exist for the benefit of the state, or does the state exist for the benefit of the people? See, the left see the former as correct. They believe that people exist for the benefit of the state. All right? This is their collective, this is their utopian, this is their Tower of Babel vision, where if we come together, we can make a name for ourselves. So they believe that people exist for the benefit of the state. However, us who believe in individual liberty, we believe that the state exists for the benefit of the people. Okay, the complete flip around. The same thing as your constitution. Okay, your constitution was drafted so that the government would be the servant of the people, whereas if you go to China, right, it's completely flipped. Okay, the people are the servant of the government, and this all shifts with again. It all goes back to the worldview that you have. Those who have a Christian worldview believe that the highest goal is freedom, whereas those that have the secular worldview believe that the highest goal is equality, that we need to be all equal. And how can we be all equal? Well, the only way that we can all be equal is if government is empowered, if government is enlarged to the point where it can enforce that equality. And that's why government has to be massive, it has to be powerful, it has to be granted unlimited powers. That way everyone can be equal. It can assure equality if government is big. Now, because we champion freedom, okay, we need to make sure the government is as limited as possible. It's a small government limited by a constitution. That's what we want, and that's what maximizes freedom. You know, I think it was Dennis Prager who said that the bigger the government, the smaller the individual, but the bigger the individual, the smaller the government. And I think Ronald Reagan also said that as government increases, liberty decreases. As government increases, liberty decreases. But what is at the heart of all this? Well, the heart of all this is God. God is at the heart of all this, okay? Because this is what happens when someone removes God. You know, I said earlier about that Pew Research statistic about, you know, the moment that someone walks away from God, the moment they become an atheist, they are 700 times more likely to become a leftist. 700 times more likely. Why? Well, listen what Francis Schaeffer says. Francis Schaeffer just nails it. He says, the humanist worldview, with inevitable certainty, leads in the direction of statism. This is so because humanists, having no God, must have something at the center, and inevitably society, government, or the state. He says, and it is inevitably society, government, or the state. That's why they see a government in which they can actually bring all their people together in government. That will be their God. And that is what they all aim for. Again, this is why they eat, sleep, and breathe politics, because they are absolutely focused on bringing about this utopia. And sadly, Al, when you look in the Christian church, so many Christians today have been taught that politics is a dirty word. They've been told that, you know, so many Christians have been told, stay out of politics. You shouldn't have anything to do with it. I think that's one of the reasons why America is in the state that she is right now.
Yeah. And I want to read just an excerpt from Ronald Reagan's inauguration speech, where he said the following. He says, basically, in this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem.
Yep.
And that was in the 80s, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I believe it was, let me just see, I think it was Jefferson who said it. Yeah, it was Jefferson. He said, most bad government has grown out of too much government. He said, most bad government has grown out of too much government. And when you think about it, it just makes perfect sense, because according to Jefferson, the only firm basis of our liberties is a strong conviction that they have come from God and are not to be violated by man. And for this reason, a secular government can never be a limited government. A secular government can never be a limited government, for it recognizes no authority other than itself, no rights other than those it grants, and it believes it has a right to control everything it touches.
Yeah. And brother, what I wanted to, and again, I want to thank everyone for being here, by the way. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully you're enjoying this topic. It is, you see why I bring the best, because they know what they're talking about. And I have to tell you, Daniel, when you talked about this during an online conference, my heart was like pounding, like, man, this is the perfect time for this perfect topic. And I have to bring Daniel just on the show because I know many did not join us during the conference. Brother, let's talk about the failure of the church. And by this, the failure of believers who are pacifist, believers who want to basically pander to the liberals out of fear or out of political correctness. And in doing so, they mix messages and they think Jesus asked us to be weak, basically, and not to stand up for the truth.
Yeah, those are all great questions, and I think that the church has actually swallowed a number of different lies. One of the lies is the whole idea that Christians need to be more so-called loving, and they can't get their head around when Christians take a stand, when Christians begin to speak up. Let me just read this. Many Christians believe that the highest calling God has placed on us is to be nice. These Christians are wrong. God has not called us to be nice. Rather, He has called us to be good. Here's the difference. Nice people never confront evil. Good people do. Nice people are weak. Good people are strong. Jesus wasn't nice, right? Okay, just think about what He said to the woman of Phoenicia. She's the Phoenician woman. He said, "Is it right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs?" Right? But on the surface that could have been offensive, but He was trying to draw something out of her heart. Okay, think about what He said about Herod. You go tell that fox. Okay,
I love that one. You tell that fox. You know?
You go tell that fox. What are you saying about?
And He didn't answer. You know. He's the only one that kept asking Jesus, and Jesus wouldn't even acknowledge him. He wouldn't even answer his single question.
Yeah. The same thing what He said about the Pharisees. He said, you guys are a bunch of snakes. He said, you guys are snakes. And if you take on that same righteous indignation today, people will say, well, you're not Christ-like. They say, well, you're not acting Christ-like. And it's just like, oh my goodness.
And why would the Lord tell us that I sent you among what? I sent you like sheep among wolves.
Yeah.
And then what does He tell us to be? Like wise, like what? Like servants. Yeah. People miss all of these things, that Jesus wants you to act and behave sometimes in a way that you can infiltrate these basically dangerous movements so you can change them. You cannot stay aside, by the way. They want you to step aside, by the way. They don't want you to be in their way anyway.
100%. 100%. Now listen, Jesus was not nice, but He was kind. Okay, He was kind. He was compassionate and He was caring, but He was unbending and unflinching when it came to standing for the truth. And in the end, it cost Him His life. Christians cannot propagate or defend the gospel by being nice. And this is what we need to remember. And this is why I am so passionate about the culture wars. Okay? Now, G.K. Chesterton said, a good soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves who is behind him. He fights not because he hates who is in front of him, but because he loves those who are behind him. And that needs to be our attitude. I mean, when you think there are scores and scores of women who are going to go and to have an abortion, but they ran into somebody who had the courage to say, listen, please don't do this. Here's what you need to know, okay? And listen, we can support you and we can love you, but please do not go down this road. There is another option for you. And there are women who decided to not go through with it, and they had their baby. And those babies today are just incredible They live an incredible life. And who's to say that
I
those,
know.
yeah,
I'm sorry. Finish your thought, brother. Go ahead.
but and who's to say that those babies shouldn't be alive today? You know, it's just like Gianna Gensen, I think her name is. She's a pro-life advocate, and she said if this is all about women's rights, if abortion is about women's rights, then what rights? What about my rights? And she was an abortion survivor. She said, "Then what
Exactly.
about my rights?" And
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 I
listen, this is
personally, brother, know of a
yeah,
person that is discipling a young man who was born because this man met his mom when she was going to an abortion clinic and talked her
wow,
out of it. And now she has this son and he's discipling him because he doesn't have a father figure, and he's saved and he worshiped the Lord. Brother, what troubles me, and here I am, I'm going to get into politics for a second here. What troubles me that believers keep telling me, oh, I'm not going to really vote for this guy. I don't like his personality. I'm like, well,
yeah,
gee, you're voting for killing children then, right? Is that,
yeah,
oh, no, I'm not going to vote for the other guy. No, you are voting for the other guy when you don't vote for anyone. So you can
yeah,
call it whatever you want. You're either basically voting for socialism, voting to kill innocent children, or you have to really think about the purposes that God laid out before us. A
yeah,
government is an instrument in God's hand, an agent for our good, for the good of those who are unborn. Nobody processes biblically anymore, brother.
that's a great point. And again, it gets back to the heart of the argument, because to the left are all about emotions. Okay, I think I'm trying to remember who said it, but we are now living in an democracy. We are living in no longer in a democracy, but an emocracy, in the sense that people's lives, even their politics and their worldview, is dominated by emotions, and people do things and believe things because it makes them feel. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel good. And look, a lot of it is one of the reasons why people hate Trump so much, because he can be brash. Okay, he can be brash. He can be bombastic, and look, he can even come across as being arrogant. But at the end of the day, and this is the reason why the middle class love him so much, is because he stands on his word. They look at his policies, they look at what he's doing and what he has done. And if you're just doing it on persona alone, that can really get you into trouble. Now remember that Hitler was Times Man of the Year. Hitler was Times Man of the Year. Many people don't know this, but FDR spoke of Hitler glowingly, right? Obviously, this is before the Second World War broke out. This is before he invaded Poland. But FDR spoke of Hitler glowingly. Hitler was Times Man of the Year. And you know, people like Winston Churchill were ridiculed. A lot of conservatives especially didn't like him.
Right.
They didn't like.
Churchill can smell it, man. Churchill can feel it. He
Yeah.
felt there is something wrong about the whole thing.
Yeah, he did. He did. And look, the thing about Churchill too is that he had a personality that was abrasive. He was absolutely abrasive. He had an issue with. I mean, he smoked like a chimney. He drank like a fish. Like, he even turned up at a political function and was rebuked by a woman there, and said, "Winston Churchill, you're drunk." And Churchill just said to the woman, you can just imagine it, but he just said to the woman, "Hey, lady, I might be drunk, but in the morning I'll be sober. But you, dear lady, are ugly."
Oh, dear Lord, you're gonna get us kicked out of YouTube right now because of
Yeah,
this.
but listen, his personality, it just goes to show, Churchill was the man of the hour. He saved Great Britain. He literally saved Great Britain. It was his words that revived the heart, and it gave him that survivalist mentality to endure the Second World War. Look, there are other examples with George Patton. There's a famous saying that says that if we had fired him for his mouth, we would have lost the war, right? And Patton did have a terrible mouth, okay? But if they find him for that, I mean, he was instrumental in the Battle of the Bulge. He was instrumental in turning the tide against the Nazis and turning the tide in favor of the Allies. Another example is the appointment of Ulysses Grant to lead the Union Army, okay? Ulysses Grant, he had a very problematic issues with his character, right? Yet Abraham Lincoln said, I cannot spare him because he fights. He fights. And that's exactly why people chose Trump, because he fights. He is fighting against the greatest threat to the American Republic, right? Ever. And that's with the socialist, the socialist-driven Democrats. They are essentially working towards transforming America into a socialist, they would say, utopia, but it will be a socialist hellhole. And it really is a major concern. They are working towards changing America to a one-party state. That's why they want to do away with the Senate filibuster. That's why they want to stack the Supreme Court. That's why they want to change Washington, D.C. into another state so they could add another senator, another liberal senator. Okay, this is why they want to abolish the Electoral College. Okay, this is what they want to do.
I tell people, go ahead and look at the states that are a micro representation of a one-party politics.
California.
You have California is an example of that.
Yeah.
You have Pennsylvania is an example of that. But people don't think that way. They go with the emotions, I laughed during the election time, the campaigns where they're blaming Trump for the COVID. And I'm like, did they miss the point that COVID didn't even originate in the US to begin with?
Yeah.
And how is any president in the world responsible for something like this? I just don't get it, man. And people buy into the lie, and they move on with it.
Yeah, they buy into the lie. It really is incredible because Trump shut down travel from China early on. And you know what? They called him a racist for doing it. They called him a racist for shutting off all the flights from China. Even Nancy Pelosi was in Chinatown in San Francisco saying, I'm here in Chinatown, there's nothing wrong, everything's fine. People forget that. They also forget the policy of the Democrat governors in bringing COVID-infected people and putting them through the nursing homes. They forget those things, which was responsible for the largest spike of deaths. You look, there's example after example after example. But again, as we were talking about earlier, Al, the left own the media. They dominate the media. So they can change the narrative to however they want it. They can change the narrative to whatever they want. In fact, they can take someone who's relatively of good character and they can destroy that person. They can take you, Al, and make you out to be the biggest idiot, bad guy that has ever existed. I know that's extremely hard to do. I don't know how they would do that. But
they can do it, brother.
They can do it. They can do it.
You want that to happen? Let me run for office and see what happens.
Listen, let me tell you something that's really amazing. In 2017, there was a statistical organization that released this very, very sobering statistic, and they found that they went over all the media coverage of Trump, and they discovered that 94% of all the media coverage was all negative. 94% was all negative. Now, there was another organization that discovered that out of all media contributions to political parties, to campaigns, how can I say it? Media campaign contributions, that's what I'm trying to say. And this is in 2017 as well, they discovered that 97% of all media campaign contributions went to Hillary Clinton. 97%.
Yeah.
Now that should make you realize, okay, we're dealing with a biased media, a shamelessly biased media. And look, this didn't happen overnight. Because, what happens when an impressionable young student wants to study journalism? They go to one of these elite colleges at Harvard or Yale, and they spend the next 3 to 4 years being indoctrinated by Marxist professors. And this is exactly why the media is full of these same people who have the same worldview. In fact, it was Dinesh D'Souza. He actually said that there are more Marxists on the faculty of our elite colleges than there are in all of Russia and Eastern Europe.
I believe it. Brother, we're running out of time, so I would like to extend an invitation to you if you can join me next week or the week after at least to continue this discussion. And like I said, I want it to be a multi-part because I want to start slowly and gradually bringing Islam into this whole picture. And then from there, bring in end times, prophecies and things of that nature. So if you're open for that, I would love really to have you again. People are excited from the comments that I'm seeing already. A quick question, maybe we'll address it later in detail, but how do you feel about this prospect of Israel and Saudi Arabia possibly having an accord also under that Abrahamic Accord thing?
I think it's great. I think it's good. Now, here's the thing that I think is interesting. What Trump is, I believe, is doing that right now, and this is when I'm putting on my eschatological hat, this is going to be a massive contrast. So Trump is doing all this great good, not just for America, but in foreign policy. I mean, he's done an incredible amount of good. I mean, he's got 2 nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize. It might be 3, actually. But the fact that he has done so much good, I believe that you are going to witness a massive contrast when a Democrat a Democrat president gets in, whether they pull off what this election fraud over the next, whether they pull it off and they get away with it, whether the Supreme Court won't strike it down, in which I believe they will. But let's just say, hypothetically, if Trump does get another 4 years, at the end of that 4 years, I believe that if the Democrats get in, they are going to reverse every single one of his foreign policy decisions. And what you will see is that you will notice that the Middle East will then go back to its status quo. It'll then go back to its anti-Israel policy. But look, a lot of the pundits, especially those in foreign policy, were stunned by what Trump pulled off. I think many of them, in fact, they didn't even want to admit it.
That's true. Yeah. Dan Zaman, you're saying that you know about all of these things that we're talking about. Why are you here? Just to waste my time so I can go and stop the show right now and read your comment? If you don't like what we're talking about, please don't stop by. Goodbye. Go ahead, brother. Continue.
So I believe that God is giving us not just a reprieve, but I believe he's giving us time to prepare. There is a storm coming. There is a storm coming, and I believe that every believer needs to prepare for that. And look, I'm not saying become a prepper, right? Okay, even there is some wisdom in that, but what I'm saying is that you need to prepare your heart, prepare your mind, prepare yourself for persecution. Prepare yourself for the coming persecution. Listen, you have to be living under a rock if you haven't noticed that there has been a huge surgence of anti-Christian hatred that's coming, and it's that we're seeing bubbling up with the left. And again, this is exactly what Jesus said. Jesus talked about the fact that there will be a falling away, as we discussed earlier. He talked about that there would be an increase of lawlessness. That's exactly what we're witnessing. Jesus said because of the increase of lawlessness, the love of most will grow cold. We're witnessing that. But then he says that you will be handed over to the authorities. He says that you will be persecuted. He said that you will be hated by all nations because of me. You'll be hated by everyone because of me. And then he said, so we need to prepare for that. We need to prepare for the time will come when they are going to come after us. Now, this is exactly what Orwell said. Orwell said that the further a society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those that speak it. Okay? I think Orwell actually got that from the Bible, but that's the truth. We are seeing this polarization in our society. The left are becoming more and more and more further left and becoming more and more wicked. And as a result of that, the more wicked they become, the more they will hate those that stand for righteousness. And this is what we need to prepare ourselves for.
Amen. And I just want to address Kazu. You're saying depends if you are pre-trip, mid-trip, or post-trip. Kazu, I have some bad news for you. The church going to go through a lot of trips. They're not immune. Yep. But I'm going to give you a good solution to this predicament, Kazu. Let's pretend we are all pre-trip. If the church go through tribulation, I'll become a mid-trip. And if it passes the mid 7 years, I'll become an in-trip or post-trip. Does that work for you? Brother, any last words of wisdom? Because next time I want us to dig deeper and deeper into this topic. And intentionally, I don't want to cover everything. I want it to be a video series.
Yeah, look, Jesus' words to us was watch and pray. Watch, pray. Watch, pray. You can't pray without watching, and you can't watch without praying. You've got to have those two things together. Keep an eye on, watch very closely what's going on in the culture. Don't be intimidated. Don't let anyone tell you to stay out of politics or don't be politically minded. No, reject that. The devil wants you to stay away, as far away from politics, right? Reject that. Go to the Lord. Keep your eyes on him. Okay, watch what's going on around you while at the same time pray. Pray. Jesus said, pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen. He said that in Luke 21. So I think those are words we need to take on board.
Amen. Brother, thank you so much, of course, as always. And thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward, really. You and I will decide whether a week or 2 weeks from now, and we will continue to dig deeper and deeper into this timely topic, actually. That's why I'm excited about it. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the moderators and the wonderful time that you give us all the time. I know some of you are really staying up late, and others are. We have some people from Australia, by the way. We have Aussies here. I mean, we believe in equal opportunity, by the way, Daniel. The Lord is good. Thank you, brother. Thank you, everyone. This is Alpha.